And joining us now, Kamran Bokhari, Director of Middle East Analysis with the private intelligence agency Stratfor, and the author of the forthcoming book, Voices of Jihad, New Writings on Radical Islam. Welcome back to TVO, Kamran.
Thanks for having me.
Good to see you. Okay, well, New Delhi, Bangalore, Jaipur, all the victims of terrorist attacks in recent years, and now almost 200 people dead in Mumbai. What is India apparently not doing well enough to deter terrorism, in your view?
Up until before the Mumbai attacks, the Indian security agencies were successful in taking down the cells that were responsible for the various bombings. But they were not able to take down the network that was generating these cells. And then we have Mumbai. Mumbai just stands out. I mean, it's far different than what we've seen before. Magnitude is huge.
They're calling it their 9/11.
They're calling it their 9/11, and rightfully so, because we've not seen so much chaos and so much damage being done by a group of terrorists. They're saying these were 10. We suspect that there were more, and which means that some of them are on the loose, and it makes sense for the Indian government to play that down, because that puts a lot of responsibility on their shoulders.
What do you think the prime motive of the attack was?
The prime motive of the attack was basically, if you have to look at it from three different perspectives, because we believe that there are three different elements that came together to pull off this operation. Indigenous Islamist militant groups in India who have a problem with the government. They perceive themselves as being treated as second-class citizens in India, and hence they want to advance their agenda. The transnational jihadists based out of Pakistan who have their agenda. They're looking at how Pakistan is ramping up the operations in the FATA. They're also looking at growing U.S. predator drone strikes and the incoming Obama administration and General Petraeus' strategy. They remember General Petraeus from Iraq and the success he had in dealing with Al-Qaeda there. So they have an interest in derailing that process. And then, of course, you couldn't have done this without some help from the organized crime syndicate, the Mumbai underworld. So it just depends who you're talking about. But the larger motivators, or movers and shakers, sorry, who were behind the attack, want to create a diversion. They want to see conflict on the India-Pakistan border that'll give them more breathing space on the western border. And they're thinking, you know, Pakistan is weak. If they're lucky, they may have a huge crisis in which they can create in which they could have a collapse of the state in Pakistan.
Well, let me follow up on that angle there, the Pakistani angle. India clearly wants Pakistan to, quote unquote, take some action, given that they think the terrorists started in Pakistan. What do they want to have done?
Well, number one, they want to see these people from Lashkar-e-Toiba, a particular group that the Indians believe are the masterminds behind this operation. So they want them cracked down. Lashkar-e-Toiba was banned by Musharraf back in 2001, 2002. Since then, the group has reincarnated itself under a different name, Jamaat al-Dawa, and it openly operates. The Indians want to see an end to that. 2, intelligence sharing. Both of these things are very difficult for the Pakistanis to do, given the erosion of the writ of the state and the control over its own territory.
Does India really expect Pakistan to do something about this?
They are not expecting, and it's immaterial, because ultimately the Indian government has to demonstrate that they will not allow these things to happen, especially this is a break with the past. In the past, they could just say, you know, here's another bombing, we'll investigate it, we'll deal with it, no need to go into a crisis mode about it. But this thing, they just can't tuck underneath the carpet and move on. They have to do something about it, which is why it's very difficult to see what kind of formula New Delhi and Islamabad can come together upon, in which the Indians don't need to act.
Well, of course, the world pays attention when these two countries are not on the best of terms, because, of course, they have nuclear weapons, and, you know, it's gotten close to red phone time in the past on this situation. So the attack comes 2 days after the president of Pakistan offered to abandon Pakistan's first strike nuclear threat and join India in an economic union. Now, those seemed like fairly far-reaching progressive moves. How significant do you think they were?
You have to see that who is it coming from. It's coming from a president who's a controversial figure. His party doesn't have a whole lot of control in parliament. In fact, its main ally, the PMLN of Nawaz Sharif, left the coalition. So they're pretty weak.
We should remind everybody that the president is Benazir Bhutto's widower.
Yes,
he's the president.
He's the president, and he is also not liked by the military. And words like we need to have an economic union with India, and we will be willing to give up the first strike option, these don't sit well with the military, especially since he's seen by the military as someone who's not the right man for the job.
Well, it's very reminiscent of sometimes what happens in the Middle East, which is when the parties get closer to an agreement, there's an attack and then everybody retreats to their respective corners. Was that perhaps part of the idea behind this as well, was to get everybody to retreat to their corners?
I think it was much more, the objective was much more large. They want to create a regional conflict. The people who are behind this, and as I may mention that, there's also an element, a rogue element of the ISI that's definitely behind this, because even though they may not have planned it, but they have the role of enabler. You couldn't pull this off without some sort of help from the state.
I'm going to ask you to hold off on ISI for a second, this very powerful intelligence agency in Pakistan. We're going to get to that in a second, but I still want to follow up on this. Condoleezza Rice, who's still Secretary of State for another 7 weeks or so, will be in the region tomorrow. Do we know what she has planned in hopes of ratcheting down the tensions there?
Well, there's not much that she can do. 2 reasons. One is that this is an outgoing administration. There's a transition taking place in Washington. President-elect Barack Obama, is coming in with his administration, so this government is outgoing, doesn't have a whole lot of influence. Secondly, India is, unlike Israel, does not subordinate its foreign policy to the United States. If you look at the Israelis, the United States has influence over what they will do in the region, especially with regards to Iran. So there's a lot of back and forth between Israel and the United States. Not the case with India. India has maintained all along a very independent foreign policy decision-making process, and therefore, and in the domestic situation right now, the tremendous amount of pressure that the Congress government sees itself in, it can't extricate itself from that unless it takes a stern action. And again, it goes back to the thing is, what can the Pakistanis do that can head off such a strong move by the Indians?
Okay, having said that, back in 2001, when there was some, nuclear saber rattling, if I can put it that way, the U.S. was very instrumental in calming things down. Now, admittedly, that was at the beginning of Bush, not near the end of Bush, so that makes a diff, obviously.
There's a huge difference. I mean, Pakistan was much more different. Musharraf was also very much firmly in his position. He was a strong leader at that point in time. The situation in Pakistan wasn't that messy. And I mean, we have to accept the fact that, this is not the Parliament attack. The Parliament attack didn't kill more than like a dozen people. And it came in the aftermath of 9/11, which was a huge attack. So it didn't get that kind of a reception or attention. This is something that's, thrown everything basically out of the water.
Okay, let me follow up now on the ISI. This is the very powerful Pakistani intelligence agency, which has often had reputed ties to various extremist groups inside Pakistan that, as far as India is concerned, would be involved in lots of mischief in their territory. Do you know of any connection between ISI and Lashkar-e-Toiba?
Well, when we say the ISI, we need to qualify who we're talking about. There is the leadership of the ISI, headed by a 3-star general, appointed by the president and the prime minister in consultation with the army chief. Does he maintain links with the Lashkar-e-Toiba? Do his lieutenants maintain links with the Lashkar-e-Toiba? Do they order bombings? No, they don't. And these are rational individuals. They're looking at the situation that Pakistan is in. They don't want more trouble.
But deeper in the service?
Deeper in the service, we've got problems because people at the lower level, 40% of the ISI is civilian. So you got a lot of contractors, consultants, retired army officers, people who came into the ISI from the civil service who've been pursuing this non-state actor proxy Islamist militant policy for close to 3 decades now.
Is there any reason to suspect that the ISI had some knowledge beforehand or involvement or, whatever with this terrorist attack?
Again, not the ISI as an organization officially, but
elements within.
But elements within, and there is evidence. In fact, there's a report today in the Asia Times Online that is coming from someone who is close to the ISI, and he's actually admitting that these are rogue elements of the agency who are involved in this. In other words, it's the ISI saying, "Look, we didn't do it," And if you're going to get tough on us, it'll get worse.
ISI's always been very powerful and influential politically in Pakistan, but I understand they shut down their political wing recently. So is that different now?
No, I mean, the shutting down is more of a desire on the part of the civilian government to have better control over the military and the intelligence services. But, you know, this is not something that you can have overnight, especially from a weak government. And there was a report the following day after that claim was made by the foreign minister that, you know, it's not been shut down, it's only become inactive.
Inactive. You were in Pakistan a few months ago. You met the then head of the ISI at that time. What kind of a guy was he?
You have to understand, the ISI chief runs the directorate on an average of 2 to 3 years. He's a manager. Is
he like the head of the CIA? Same kind of thing?
More or less, but he's a serving general, 3-star most of the time, and he's a manager. He comes from a different unit of the army and then leads the ISI for a certain period of time, and then moves on, and he's replaced by others. So in that respect, he's just a bureaucrat, and he's trying to run the agency. But this is an agency that has, by its very nature, the business that it's in, intelligence, it's very nebulous, it's very murky, and then this organization has proliferated in terms of its size and its dealings, especially with Islamist militant actors, which are not necessarily known by the leadership, what a certain major or a lieutenant or a non-com is doing at a certain point. Obviously, they're pursuing the general guidelines, but it's not as if the ISI chief or someone else is saying, hey, guy, go plant a bomb somewhere.
And the guy who you met, who was then the head of the service, he's out now, right? There's somebody else in place now.
Yes, he's been replaced, and it was after there was pressure from the United States that you need to clean up the directorate, and this was the way of this current government to show that it is. Does it clean up the directorate? No, certainly not. You don't shuffle a few people around and hope that things will change. This is not the institutional memory of the organization that you're changing. It's just the leadership.
Just in our last 30 seconds here, I'm sure you saw in Newsweek magazine, they recently judged Pakistan to be the most dangerous country in the world. Do you agree?
I would say that is not an unfair description, because this is a country with nuclear weapons, close to 168 million people, an economy that's, tanking. The writ of the state is melting. It's got problems on both its eastern and western borders. It's got a jihadist insurgency inside. It's the main hub of the transnational jihadist network. So what more can you ask for?
Doesn't sound good the way you've described it, that's for sure. Kamran Bokhari from Stratfor, thanks so much for visiting us at TVO tonight. We're grateful for your time.
Thank you.